broadcast is now starting.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this edition of the PixelMill Webinar Series and today's offering of leveraging Microsoft Teams for a SharePoint-Centric Organization. My name is Michael Wells. I am the Partnerships and Community Manager here at PixelMill. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. If this is your first time, hey, welcome. We're happy to have you. If any time you have any questions, there is a questions tab for you guys to put those in there. I will be tracking them throughout the session, and I will try to sneak them in there to our speaker. If we're not able to get to those during the chat or during the session, I will get to those at the end. We do have a 15-minute Q&A like we always do, and we'll get to those then. Without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today. He is a really cool guy. He's a Microsoft MVP. He is the founder and CEO of CollabTalk. He is Christian Buckley. Take it away.
Hello. Yeah, it's great to be here, and hopefully I don't sound like I'm yelling. I get passionate about this thing, and I get too close to my mic, so just if you can, just Michael, maybe let me know if that happens. You can just jump on and be like, Christian, calm down.
Calm down. No problem.
It's all okay. But hey, I see a bunch of familiar names out there. I'd say faces, but it's text that I'm looking at. So Fernando, Greg, quite a few people on there, in fact. Great to have everybody on board. And just to level set too, it's a fun topic. I actually just did a workshop in Richmond, Virginia yesterday. I was out in that area with Dux Raymond Sy doing an event with the AvePoint team where I was talking about groups and teams, and in the other room, Dux was talking about SharePoint. And I'll just be honest and say that I had the larger group. So Dux is a great speaker, but I think a lot of people were interested in talking about teams and understanding kind of what's out there. So I'm going to go through. This is I would say, general session. I kind of refer to it as a Teams 101 of what it does. But I will get in and talk about some of the administrative and security compliance, that side of it, some of the new things that were announced and talked about at Ignite. And I also, and Michael's aware of this, swiped a bunch of slides from a call today from Microsoft. I had other versions of it, and for some reason, Microsoft slides are just prettier than mine. But they're all from actually Mark Cashman's keynote from SharePoint Saturday, Paris. It must have been rough. He was in Paris. But I was 3 weeks in South Africa, so there. I did SharePoint Saturday events in Durban, Johannesburg, and Cape Town. So I'm wired because I'm still on South Africa time. I've been up since 3 a.m. local time, so yay.
Oh, lucky you.
All right, yeah, feeling great. All right, so I'm gonna jump into that. For those that don't know me, as Michael said, the founder and CEO of CollabTalk. I've been in this space for a long time. A lot of people know me through some of the other ISVs that I worked for, but as of January 1st, I started my own company, and I do independent research and technical marketing services almost entirely for the Microsoft ecosystem, working with ISVs and SIs, the consulting companies, and a fractional CMO. Most recently, I was the chief marketing officer for another SharePoint ISV, but spent time at Microsoft for 3.5 years, helped kind of kick off the team that started Office 365, the hosted SharePoint portion of that. So that's my background. You can find lots of info on me out there. My blog, of course, over at buckleyplanet.com and my company at collabtalk.com. And I kind of already talked about what my company does. So there's that. There's some of my customers. Let's get in it. And I love this, a couple statements that a good friend who's now at Microsoft, Caruana Gatimu, who's I think she's a PUM, I think that's her role now, but over head of or program manager or program lead for the Microsoft Teams engineering team. But she's been in the space for a long time, and Caruana and I actually launched the SharePoint Saturday Los Angeles event back in 2010, so been hanging out together for a while. She talks about how the adoption of Teams is a change in behavior. I go out and I talk and I present and write a lot around change management. That's my background is building and running PMOs. I did that as a consultant for years and in some little companies like Pacific Bell and other solutions, other companies, OEMs, built out PMOs, got into project and portfolio management and collaboration technology, found my way into the SharePoint space. But I've always referred to myself as a collaboration guy. And for those that deal with the adoption engagement side of the house, we understand that it's not about the technology. In fact, you can have outdated technology, but passionate people that are tied into that understand how to leverage that outdated technology to do their jobs, and they'll be highly successful. On the flip side, you can have the latest, greatest technology, all the bells and whistles turned on, and if end users don't adopt it, if they're not logging in and using it, then you failed. Doesn't matter how perfectly you matched the requirements and captured those requirements. If users aren't there, then it's irrelevant. You failed the system. And so using teams is about changing behavior for organizations. And I think it's a really interesting topic, of course, in the SharePoint space. And SharePoint in the US, I was telling them over in, while I was in South Africa, that it's something like 85, 90% of the Fortune 5,000, it's an incredible, staggering number, are using SharePoint. And so that question comes up all the time is, well, we've made all these investments in this infrastructure, and maybe there's a path, you're moving over to Office 365, and I think a lot of organizations that say, no, we're staying SharePoint on-prem. There's still Office 365 in those environments. Or maybe you've started making the transition. You're in a hybrid environment, or you made the switch, you're purely in the cloud using SharePoint Online. All great stories still have that question, how do we leverage this new technology? How does it fit in? There's that whole which tool to use when argument. I'm not a fan of that question because I think it's the wrong way of looking at the problem. But it all comes down to this changing of behavior. So next slide here, or next section here. So it's more than a product, it's a different way of working. I agree with that statement, but I made up this slide. So it's changes about people. It's about rewiring corporate culture. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I'm gonna look at things through the lens of a SharePoint person. This is a Teams webinar, but through the lens of that SharePoint organization. All right, I'm gonna share a slide here, which I swiped from a good friend of mine, Benjamin Nyland, who I think swiped it from somebody else, but it's all fun, it's all fair in love and war here. Now, Benjamin and I did a keynote together at the European SharePoint Conference a while back, and he used this slide. What's funny is that we talk about this, like this shadow IT. I remember writing an article, I think it was in 1998, and it was for like Software Development Magazine or something in that category thing, where I talked about rogue IT. And I was trying to find the old hard copy of that, so it was in the print edition that it came out. And so it's always been an issue. IT is cyclical. So we run into these same problems. We like to rename it, talk about it as if it's new. You've got young people that have come into the workforce. They were in grade school or not born back when I was writing about this stuff in the 90s. And so it's new to them, but it's a problem that we've seen again and again. And it's really proliferated since we saw so many these cloud services that are coming out. And so when you had the software as a service crowd, like all the vendors starting to experiment in the late 90s and early 2000s, we started to see this problem more and more. But it's certainly the case now, where we've followed this traditional roadmap of deploying SharePoint every 3-4 years. And it's easy from an IT organization standpoint to deploy technology that way, because every 3-4 years, I can go look at it and preview it in advance. I can look at how this impacts my existing environment. I can recreate customizations, kind of all those arguments for moving slow, training people, getting them ready for that, and have all the the knowledge management assets out there ready for this new solution. But what's happened is that the longer that it takes IT to respond to employee needs, the more likely that employees will go around them. And here's a great slide that was shared in Mark Cashman's presentation, and you've probably seen some of these that I've borrowed from Mark's deck, from other Microsoft official presentations that are out there. It's a great one. It's just showing that how complex our environments are getting. And so each one of these activities has the potential to have a rogue or shadow IT activity around it. If I'm, for example, I'm in HR, down bottom left quadrant here, And I'm going and trying to build out, maybe sometimes an HR organization may even have its own IT organization, depending on the size of the enterprise, or people that are dedicated to the HR solutions and serving internally those needs. But HR as a team may say, look, we need to go out and use this new benefits. There's all these new programs that are out there, all these new systems. And we've got this home-built system that IT built for us that is outdated. I think the images were created using CorelDRAW circa 1994, and it's just not keeping up with where we need to be. And why are we doing this? Where I can just go and me and HR use my credit card, my corporate card, or personal card, go and log in, purchase this SaaS-based solution, and start using it and start adding people with their corporate email into it, which sounds great on the surface. This new, latest, greatest, up-to-date functionality. I'm able to export out of other systems, proprietary systems, pull in customer or partner data and employee data into this system to be able to set it up. Yeah, that's great. How does that fit in with overall as a company, your compliance, your auditing, all of your security standards? If you're in a highly regulated industry, are you compliant with those standards that you need to be up to date on? So that's what's the problem of shadow IT. We're now so in fear of not letting our users do whatever they want that because if we don't let them, they're going to go do it without us knowing about it. So it's like having out of control kids for those who have teenagers. Not that any of my kids were ever out of control like that, but hey, there's bad seeds out there. I'll be honest. But this idea that hey, let's let them do what we want so that they're at least still communicating with us. No, there still need to be rules. There need to be guidelines, and in an enterprise, we have to be compliant with certain rules. Especially when you have laws in place. You've got the PII standards in the U.S. You have now the GDPR that's going to hit in May next year for the European Union. So it's and there's, what is it? It's a PIPA or PIPO. I don't remember what it is. PIPI something. I just think Pippi Longstockings down out of South Africa. So something similar to the GDPR. But you have now all of these rules and regulations around how you manage personal sensitive information that you need to make sure that you comply with. And by moving to some of these untrusted, unknown solutions, it's not just that they're not consistent in how they manage all this information. It opens up risk, because you don't have visibility into it. You can't go audit those systems and be able to manage those things. So anyway, that's something that all of those issues that are happening, that's just the changing world that we're in. And of course, Microsoft has been caught up in that as well, with offering all of these various solutions that there seem to be a lot of overlap in. And that's that, which tool do I use when? So you had that whole battle when the SharePoint-centric organizations, Microsoft goes and buys Yammer, and it's like, wait a second. Now you have messaging coming from a very enthusiastic a Yammer organization inside of Microsoft with a ton of overlap in capability in the use cases. It's like it just didn't make any sense. Now Microsoft has improved on some of the story, and I'll get to some slides I think that help shore that up of where things fit. But it really then comes down to, and I think you need to start here as an enterprise, is understanding what is your collaboration culture in your organization. I did this yesterday in Richmond, where the small group that was assembled, we went through and did introductions and talked about, where their collaboration, where it actually happens. And I think everybody in the room sat there and started with, well, we're a SharePoint-centric organization, which is great. But when you start surfacing how they're actually working and talk to them about that, where SharePoint becomes this hub for the content and some process-centric activities, but collaboration was really happening through instant messaging, through email, some through other social tools, and a little bit in Yammer, some of it happening in older versions of SharePoint and other add-ons and third-party solutions. But when you look at the footprint, you can't just say, hey, here's the platforms that we have in place. You have to look deeper than that and say, how are people actually collaborating? It's a different question then what technology do we have that are licensed, or where we're storing our documents? Because documents do not essentially, it may not equal collaboration in your organization. So understanding where people collaborate, that's going to really impact how the tools that you select and how your organization works. Everybody that's here, that's on this call, arguably has SharePoint up and running. You've invested in it, on-prem, online, doesn't matter. You've got a lot of SharePoint there, but you probably are having all of these issues where people are not adopting, or they're not engaging that, or they go in, they upload files and they get back out, but they may have 20 different versions since what was uploaded to SharePoint that's on their personal OneDrive, or they may be using, maybe it's an unsupported system, it's on Dropbox or Google Drive, or maybe it's just being emailed around, which probably is all of those things. And so you've got those issues that are happening with the SharePoint-Centric. However, it still makes sense to have your portal, have your primary enterprise environment be built around SharePoint while still leveraging this new technology. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But let's, from that culture question, here's some quick scenarios. And I should also say that, yes, all the slides all are going to be available. I've got versions of this that are out in a couple different places, but I'm going to upload all of this to slideshare.net, which you'll be able to search and find, and drop me an email if you'd like a copy. And I always make it downloadable as well. So scenario one, you've got Stephanie, who is a web dev and a millennial. And for her, personalization is critical to everything that she's doing. It has to be relevant to the things that she's working on. Doesn't want to have to go dig for an hour to search to find what's relevant. She's accustomed to, through the experiences of these web tools, these social tools, of it being personalized based on her activity, her network, her permissions, all those things. She lives on her mobile device. She's very collaborative, so it's constantly, it's one of these things, and I'm kind of this way too. You don't have to be a millennial to think this way, but I'm blending personal and professional networks in life. 10:30 at night, she's on, sees something that's relevant to a project she's working on, will send out an email or tweet people that are in the community around that, and so there's that blurred line between home and life, and just wants to have fun and be collaborative, is very passionate about what she's doing. Then you have Tasha. Tasha is a program manager. She owns several key business processes. She owns a bunch of these very workflow-based, structured, compliant processes. So her job is to make sure that the right documentation is there, the right people in the right roles have signed off on different tasks, and that they're compliant and moving things forward. She works with a lot of attorneys and analysts and other people that prefer that in-person or person-to-person, the phone call, that real-time meeting. But so she's working a lot with email. She manages a number of vendors and parallel projects, but it's that kind of old school way of collaboration. Still collaboration, still can be working with multiple technologies, but very kind of process-based. Then you have Hugo. And Hugo is a customer success manager, does a lot of business development. So he manages a lot of these virtual teams that are across projects, a lot of internal, but also works with vendors and partners and customers and has these V teams. And so very heavily involved in the customer community, manages the partner and customer portals, does a lot of in-person training, but is constantly putting together teams, these virtual teams for a project, for an initiative, that are sitting across all these different areas. So when you go and look at these styles, so you've got that real-time, team-based, persistent chat, really kind of focused at the ground level of getting stuff done. You've got that process-based, in-person, email-based conversation. And then you've got a mix of those things, but more community-based and virtual and social aspect of that. So looking at these styles, and thinking about your own company, you're probably thinking, hey, yeah, I see a little bit of each of these, but we're predominantly in one of these styles. The reality is we have all of these styles within our organizations. We have all of these styles even within our small team. And the reality is that you might be working on a project where you run through the length of that project and experience all three of these. Here's an example. At the beginning of a project, you've gone and you've built out a team site, and you're internally only, you're working to building the initial assets of this. But then you go and put together some virtual teams where you may have some external people, but you're working with a more diverse set of internal people. And Microsoft Teams may be the right place for that, where you're working on specific tickets or projects. And so going and standing up teams with specific channels for each of these different initiatives or phases or even customers, and then working on it in that real time with that, Microsoft used that phrase, that high velocity chat around those problems. Maybe that fits, but you're still referencing back to that SharePoint. And then at the end of the project where it's been completed, or maybe it just gets to a stage where now it's live, it's out there, and you want to go out to reach all 5,000 employees in your organization. Is email the right way to do that and have a conversation? No, and Teams isn't the right place to have that either, or SharePoint, and hope that people are sharing. And so you go and you spin up a Yammer group and have conversations there where you share out links back to SharePoint or to the relevant Microsoft Teams, but then push this out to the broader base of employees to get feedback around certain concepts or ideas or deliverables. And so here's one project, one initiative where you've leveraged SharePoint and Teams and Yammer and kind of everything else in between. And that is the reality of our projects. When you force fit the technology like SharePoint and treat SharePoint as a hammer and everything's as a nail, you are going to have a lot of problems. And that's where we see the adoption issues. That's where there's this whole which tool do we use when. There is no which tool to use when. The answer is all of them should be available, which is a confusing way to go and talk to people that don't understand how they work together. And let's be honest, there is still on the back end, there is still work for Microsoft to do to bring all these pieces together. So we have these user experiences that are out there, and maybe you lead with one of these tools or one of these collaboration styles. And I love this one, is that what's the right solution for your org or for your project? This is the $25 answer to every SharePoint question ever asked, which is, it depends. And it really does depend on the needs of the project. Now, you can't go and build onto your collaboration culture around this, hey, use whatever you want, and even within the Office 365 ecosystem to say, hey, go use whatever you want. You still should go with guidance and say, hey, we have a portal. Our portal is built on SharePoint, and here's how we leverage these different technologies. How you do that, how you structure that, really depends on that culture of your organization, how much you dictate versus how much you open that up and say, hey, use the right tool that you want, but do it in the right way. And that's where the story of groups comes in. So here I'm going to show you some stuff. I will go in and demo a few things as well. But where I talk about Office 365 groups, Teams, and then what is available within Teams, and I'll talk about SharePoint as well and how it fits within that. I said this for the first time at the workshop yesterday, I'll say it again now, is that most people, when they describe groups, are wrong. They get it wrong. I sat in a couple sessions the last 3 weekends at the 3 SharePoint Saturdays and overheard MVPs describing groups and then teams and then going on to their other SharePoint related content, and they got it wrong. Now, there's Microsoft made mistakes in how they talked about and positioned groups when it went live and confused everyone. And so hopefully I can clarify, help you understand how it comes together. And there's a reason why Microsoft is continued to work on the messaging here, and they've gotten much better with the whole inner loop, outer loop, and I'll share that slide here in a minute as well. So you've got all these options. You've got SharePoint and the new modern sites and the communication site templates and all these things. That's great. You've got Yammer that's out there. You have the new Yammer web part to connect the two. All great stuff that's out there. Now you've got Teams as well, which we'll see here in a minute. But it all comes back with starting with and explaining this which tool when through this idea of groups. Now, I've been in IT for almost 30 years. My entire career, my undergrad's in marketing. I've got an MBA, but my professional career has been in. Spent a couple of years as a business analyst and technical writer, but then went right into project management, and so I've always been around engineering, and it wasn't really until the last couple of years that I really was in a true marketing role. But even as I was a chief evangelist for a couple of ISVs, I was connected more on the product team side of things than I was into marketing. But looking at this, I've described this in the past, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where there's the whole, the concept of service-oriented architecture. There was this, concept of a service bus across that. So you could take disparate technologies as you're connecting your ERP with your CRM, and the idea of the service bus was that this communication layer between those systems. And in many ways, social collaboration and instant messaging became sort of this service, the service bus or communication layer between disparate tools. And so you had things like, if you recall, there was a movement with Dynamics 365, and Salesforce did the same thing with like a Yammer integration, where you could then integrate Yammer in, and so have a conversation through a Yammer group that would be surfaced within Dynamics 3, your Dynamics environment, so your CRM. And then you could embed that same conversation over into SharePoint and go to the Yammer UX and have that conversation there. And so it was, basically like an iframe feeding that in and getting access to that conversation, that thread. And there were many, many limitations to, it's not a true integration. That was more of just like a feed into that. But it still allowed organizations to go and link together these disparate tools and be able to interact between them. Well, that is really, it's a temporary, it's an insufficient way to link technologies together. And Microsoft had this problem that every time they would go and build a new technology, there was this question of, where does it fit? What does it mean? And what does the permission structure look like? Who gets access to this? And so when they would go and add in and acquire some products or build new products, there was this question that just started up over and over again. It was confusing to everyone. Like, what licenses do I have to have? And how frustrating it was to be out there as an MVP or even as a partner representing Microsoft, talking to customers and going through and saying, look, certain things, bells and whistles, are not lighting up because you have the wrong version of something, or you don't have the right license of that other product, or you also need to go buy this to get that benefit. So you'd see these wonderful, beautiful demos done at a show, and then not be able to do it at home because you don't have all the right pieces connecting together. Well, so then you have this concept of groups, which is a construct that ties together all these products. And so it really is, in Azure Active Directory, it's a security group. It's this, again, I use the word, because I'm a big Tron fan, construct. It's this construct in which everything plugs into. So let's say there's 100 of us that are sitting here. We're a company. We create an Office 365 group for our company, 100 people. We all have access, everything turned on. Well, so that means that we have a shared inbox, in Outlook, we've got OneDrive, we have OneNote, we have a calendar, we have Skype, we have all of these different products which are turned on, they're enabled within that group. So by default, everyone within that group has access to all of those products. Now, Microsoft now goes and develops a new product, Teams, or they develop Power Apps or Planner, all of these other tools which then plug into the construct. If it's not part of a group, if Microsoft goes and releases a new product that's disconnected now from a group, from that construct, it's a valid question, like to ask, well, how does it fit in? Where is it? What do I do with it? What do I need to do? Who gets access? Who needs access? How does it integrate with everything else? But by default, when it's part of the group construct, when they release and say, here's Planner, it's now part of a group, so every group gets one. You feel like Oprah. Everybody gets planner. You get planner. You get planner. I love that. Anyway, yeah, there needs to be. I'm sure there's a bunch of memes that are out there around SharePoint and the Oprah. This is the downside to doing a webinar and not having people on there and not being able to see people's like. I have my little jokes and I'm laughing in my own head, but you guys are, right now in my mind, everybody's thoroughly involved, entertained by all this. So anyway, you've got these new products that are out there. Planner comes out and goes live. It's plugged into that group's construct. I'm not asking that question of who gets it. Everyone in our 100-person company gets access to it because we're all part of that group. So that it was a necessary next step to Microsoft's story to moving things to this evergreen cloud-based software as a service model, that we have this group's construct so that they can now go concentrate on developing new features and either plugging that in. Oh, thank you for the comment there. Yes, everybody laughed. Excellent. But there's that, Microsoft can go and very quickly deploy new technology and answer 99% of the questions when it's part of that construct. You know that it's either turned on by default or not. It's either, it's enabled or not, if there's additional licensing that's involved, or if you need to have E3 versus E5 to get access to it. Those kinds of things. But but there's not a question of how it fits in with the rest of the technology. Very important. And I'm not going to beat up this. If there's any other questions around groups, I can answer that. Look, there are a lot of other issues just with the fact that there is a groups mobile app. I've never logged in and actually used it because it's more of an administrative functionality capability. I'm not consuming groups in that way that I would go and use a mobile app for it. I'm going in for my small organization. I've got 4 employees, and so I go and create groups, and then provision all of the necessary the team members that are around that, just through the console, through my workstation here, my desktop computer or laptop. But I'm not going to do those things through the mobile app. Maybe you will. Maybe you've got that many groups that you're going and provisioning and creating. But anyway, so I'm going to come back to that because I want to jump over to Teams. So then you have this, and hopefully you can see this all right. So it's a screen capture of a Microsoft slide. Here's the new messaging that Microsoft has around this of inner loop, outer loop, answer to the which tool to use when. And this is a great step forward in helping answer that question because, and it's part of that, to say that my little scenario of using multiple technologies in the life of one project, here's a great example of that. You have that inner loop. I always think of the inner loop meaning that, hey, this is a project-based or even a task or ticket-based a conversation where I need to go grab 3 people on our 100-person organization. I don't need all 100 people on there. I don't need to throw this out to Yammer and say, hey, who can help with this problem? Maybe that's something we'll do later if the small team can't do it. But I just need that persistent chat where we're focused, where we could go in there, work on it live in real time, pop up video, into that. So we have video chat, as needed. But where Teams is the perfect place to go and solve that small team, high velocity, get stuff done, close out that ticket, close out that project as part of that broader project or initiative. Teams is the right place for it. And then on the outer loop, you've got the Yammer. This is where, hey, this is our knowledge assets. The project is now done. So the 20 people that participated, it's now archived, but we want it to be part of the knowledge assets for our organization. Or maybe in the middle of a project, say, hey, we've got this customer scenario. Has anyone had this experience? You don't want to limit this just to the people that are on delivery side of the house, because maybe there's somebody that's working in IT or working in engineering that used to be at another company in a delivery role, and they had relevant experience that could help solve the problem you're looking for. And Yammer might be the right place to go and open up that conversation and then leave that conversation open long term. Here's another great example, a real world example. I was part of a company that we got acquired a couple days after we were acquired. Is a SharePoint ISV. We had an all hands meeting, and there were like 300-400 people that were on this call globally. And as we're sitting there getting presentation after presentation, and I kind of looked around and said, hey, there's some people that are taking notes, but not many. Where's all this information being stored? I think I asked one of the speakers that had just finished, where are your slides? Like, oh, I should share those out. It was like an afterthought. Like, wait a second, we're losing all this knowledge. And so right there, we spun up the Yammer environment and created a group for this this town hall, and started capturing notes and taking pictures and adding other people into it, and other people started making comments and asking questions. We then started fielding, or the speakers started fielding questions that were being asked via Yammer, so people that weren't there in the room but were at other global locations could be added in. But what's more important is that 6-8 months later, there was another acquisition. They did another town hall, and they went through, and we automatically went back to that town hall group in Yammer. And as people were asking questions, some of the questions of those new employees were the same ones that were asked 6 months earlier. And as we did a search in Yammer, there it was. And so we started adding on to those already there knowledge assets, conversations within Yammer. That outer loop conversation of using Yammer was perfect. Now that you have, one of the problems with Yammer was that when you would save a document, have a conversation in Yammer, it would be saved into a Yammer artifact, a Yammer database that was separate from everything else. Now, all of the back end of Yammer is the documents are in SharePoint Online. So now when you're having a Teams discussion, the files that you share there in Teams, the files that you share in Yammer, and you have the ability through Outlook, if it's not on your desktop, to share all those things to SharePoint Online. It's all the same backend to those things. Now, where there's still gaps, and then you have email that sits across these things, the group ties all these things together. Where there is a gap today is the fact that not yet everything that is a knowledge asset. So when you think about conversations, chat, there are 5 different technologies today in the Microsoft ecosystem for chat. Not all of them save to the same place, meaning that you don't yet have the ability to go and do a search, and from that substrate through the Microsoft Graph, you cannot yet get a full result set of all of these things. Microsoft is moving in that direction rapidly. I don't have a time frame around that. I'd be pure speculation. But where it's going and why the graph is so central to everything that's happening behind the scenes here is that when I go in and do a search, it will, in the future, I will pull back my SharePoint results that are relevant. Of course, everything permission trimmed, but I can pull back my SharePoint, my Teams, my Yammer, my email, my desktop, my LinkedIn relevant information, as well as public internet results, all back in this federated search result set. That's where it's going, all because of the Microsoft Graph. And that's why the whole where to go and collaborate is becoming, the which tool to use when is less and less relevant because of the group's construct. It's all the same backend. It's all being tied together, connected through the graph. And so we just need to get everything on the substrate. We just need everything to be visible and reachable through the Microsoft Graph API. And then we will have that complete story, and that's where Microsoft is headed. And I spent a lot of time on that before jumping over to Teams, because it is so crucial to the rest of this and understanding how these things come together. There's great guidance that's out there. I'm not gonna spend any time on this of that there's use cases that are out there. Microsoft content is getting better and better out there. I'll refer back to it later, but there's a site called successwithteams.com. Which is really, it's just a link to other blog posts and internal material and Channel 9 and YouTube videos. But Microsoft will be expanding on that and telling more and more use cases and stories of how Teams works with each of the other workloads and kind of comes together. So let's talk about where SharePoint fits. And here's where I grabbed a bunch of Mark Catchman's slides. So it's out there in a couple different places, public. There's nothing NDA here, so I stole it all. But again, it was just prettier this way. So SharePoint and OneDrive is still that connected workplace. And I've talked about for years about this, the intelligent workplace, which is all tied to that graph. It's all tied to that social graph, all that data, how it's being compiled. And SharePoint continues to sit at the center of this. SharePoint not going away. SharePoint 2019 is not the last version of SharePoint. You will be able to do, there is no end date. They're already thinking about, working on, no, that'll be, SharePoint on-prem v next, whatever it's called, whether it's SharePoint 2022 or whatever it is. There will be other versions of SharePoint on-prem. As long as it's needed and relevant and customers are still buying it, they'll continue to make it. But it's this place, this connected workplace behind the scenes here. And so here's how it plugs in. You've got, it's at the connected service. SharePoint is on the back end of that. As I said, Teams, where you share content, it's in SharePoint. Yammer, where you share content, it's in SharePoint. And so you've got all those experiences as you're using, if you're still using Skype, as long as we're still talking about Skype that's out there, because there's Skype clients, it's all SharePoint Online at the back end of that as well. And so, OneDrive for Business, hey, it's SharePoint. It's the Palmolive moment. Your hand is soaking in SharePoint. We're all still using SharePoint. I would argue that, like my little organization, CollabTalk, 4 employees, we are a Teams shop. And I made this comment sitting on a panel with the Microsoft product team, marketing teams in August, and with a bunch of other MVPs up on stage talking about this. And I said, look, I never go into, for my company internally, never just go into SharePoint. We don't have a SharePoint portal per se. However, still using SharePoint because I'm consuming it as a service through Teams, through Yammer, and occasionally I do have some SharePoint team sites that are built that are out there. Use it a lot with customers and partners. There's just no need with my small company in the way that we work because of our style, our culture. But you've got all these components that are still part of the site. So these are great slides that are out there. Where he goes in, and Mark shared these, the building blocks of your intranet. He talked about the differences between team sites and that template, the communication sites template, how you're using those things. Of course, now we have, everybody's excited to be talking about how these things come together, where they share, and now these hub sites. I just got off this morning, had a CollabTalk tweet jam on the topic of hub sites. And so it's just another way to go and aggregate and share the information together. So from a portal perspective or an organizational perspective, to go and continue to find relevance in building out and maintaining SharePoint. Now, it's a building block of your intranet. It's a key component of that, through which you may be using team sites, communication sites, hub sites. You may go and customize and build these other things, and then you may be using these other tools. And here's some screenshots of how different hub sites, how it's pulling together. If you don't know what a hub site is, raise your hand. Yeah, all right. We don't need to see like flag raised hands out there, but hub sites, all that it is, it's a top level site collection that allows you to go and plug team sites and communication sites into it, and then they will then adopt the theming, the permission structure, inherit all of that. This, man, I needed this years ago, years and years ago, and a lot of consulting organizations that have made money by building out departmental sites and customizing these things and restructuring existing SharePoint environments. This takes away a lot of that need, because I could go build that top level, like for my department, and I can then go and pull in. Let's say I'm the I always go back to this, the project management organization, and I need to provide that roll up to all of the projects that are within the PMO. And so I can go and build this top level hub and plug in every single team site or communication site for individual projects, whether they're internal or external, plug them into the hub site. It adopts that, inherits that theming, still maintains the permission structure for those team sites, but automatically adopts the theming and provides the ability to do the roll-up of news and information and documents and content, all of those things which are shared. So somebody that needs to have a portfolio view of all of those project sites can now do this. And you wrap up a couple projects, remove them from this the hub site, and move them over to, let's say you create a hub site of archived projects, and lock out the permissions, change the permissions where it's view only for everybody, but they're, you know, quote unquote archived. You can then switch it over to that hub site. It'll change the theme, it'll change the permissions based on that top level. And so it allows you to go in and if you have a reorg in your business, I know that's unheard of, a reorg inside of a company, and shuffle sites around, and the pain that we've had, essentially it's like doing a small migration to move the content and site structure around and build the navigation and retrain everybody on where to go and find all those broken links, navigation links from, you know, throughout your environment. And this cleans up all of that. A lot of exciting things happening there. There's also, of course, all the Office 2019 and SharePoint 2019, all that stuff happening. And there's the SharePoint roadmap. Again, I swipe these slides. They're not mine. They're coming from Microsoft. There's a lot of great things that are happening around that basically the message here is that SharePoint is still relevant. If you have any concern about being a SharePoint-centric organization, you should not. It's not going anywhere. It's solid. And you just need to now adjust your thinking based on your the collaboration style and culture of your organization, of whether you leverage Teams. Now I'm going to jump into Teams. All right. It's really this concept around the intelligent enterprise. I even like referring to Teams as being like the perfect manifestation of an Office 365 group, because you can have, you know, tabs open for a project or an initiative to all of the relevant tools. You know, if you have that SharePoint centric, and we'll show some examples of that, but it's surfaced that stuff through tabs, connectors, and bots. And that's what I'm going to show you here really quick. So high level is a tab. Tab is a browser window. We'll see it here in the demo in a minute, but you have the ability to go and grab these out of the box tabs to open up to these other external tools. You could create, and the thing that's most common that I do is I just add a tab and add as a URL to an external site, to a service that's not yet natively pulled up within the tabs option here. I think there's some room for improvement on how Microsoft just doesn't dump a bunch of tabs on here for tools that I don't care about and that I'll never use, but allows an organization to go in and refine that. And I'll show you some of that in a minute, a screenshot that I've got. But what tabs can do, it's about providing an interface into relevant content, surface sites and tools in context to conversations. I'll show you that in the demo here. And then it removes a lot of the which tool to use when argument, because from the tabs, you can have all of the tools surfaced in context to your project or to your conversation. I'll show you examples of that. Connectors, what are connectors? So you can go in and in a channel, go and add a connector. And basically, if you've got a tab out there for, and I'll use in my example, like Trello. Trello is a Kanban list management tool that's out there, and there's a free version. And I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. But you can go and add a connector. And what that does is it pushes information from that service down to your conversation. And so, and I'll show you the Trello example. So you're having this threaded conversation around a project, and to be able to go back and forth and say, it's like, hey, let's jump over to Trello and have this conversation. Or I just created a new task for you in Trello. Hey, you need to go take a look at it. That's less efficient collaboration. Instead, if I create a new card and with a connector, it automatically notifies the person within the conversation, hey, that is a much more efficient way to collaborate. So that's what connectors do. It's that push, that one-way push from those services to your conversation. So you have that richer experience within the threaded conversation. So point out to all these other services. You can go build connectors to your own internal tools, your own home-built technology. I always use the example of like a ticketing system. Maybe you built one. A lot of companies have. Don't be embarrassed. I don't know why you built it when you can buy so many different services that are out there. But then maybe your favorite tool that you have purchased doesn't have a connector. You can go build one. get the notifications, complete tasks within the channel. And then you have bots. And the difference between the connector and the bot is that it's two-way. So you have that ability, and I'll show you some examples here in a minute, automate a lot of those manual tasks, enhance that threaded conversation. It acts as a personal assistant. And where it's tied into the Microsoft Graph in the future, they're going to get really incredibly smart and using natural language, which is the benefit of it, not having to go through a drop down or use some archaic language or scripting language or code. It's not like PowerShell, and you've got to be an expert in PowerShell to get any use out of PowerShell, but it actually allows you to go in and say, hey, show me all the projects that Steven is working on, and it will go out and pull that down. Show me what's the status of project XYZ, and go and pull the result set back. So it's just really going to be powerful there. Run surveys. Hey, how many people are available to have a meeting on Thursday at 2 p.m.? And go and pull from people's systems that are in context to the project or that initiative, pull that information down and get status and be able to automate a lot of that stuff. So, and think about, I always point people over to, if you did not see Julia White's demo a couple years back around GigJam, which you can no longer go into, it's an R&D effort, but within GigJam, definitely go and look at that video, because it really gives you a snapshot into the future where you have the Cortana and analytics and the machine learning, the artificial intelligence capability all together, and to automate collaboration. It's a really powerful story and where Microsoft is going to improve that user experience. It's that multi-sensory collaboration capability that we're going to. All right, so there's two primary bots, the Who bot and the T bot, that are out there. But let's jump in and show you that. You can go read about that stuff. In fact, you can ask the T bot about the T bot and the Who bot, and it'll tell you that. So let me jump over here. Here is, yeah, I don't need that. Let's snooze on that stuff. All right. So I've got here, if you can see my screen, somebody indicate, Michael, can you see that all right?
Yes, I can. You're good.
Okay. So we got Trello that's out there. I've got very simple. Here's this Kanban list, man. So actually we're actually doing it. We're running it. It's happening. So it's in there. So organize the demo. I'm going to put this in there as, you know, checklist, or you know what? I'm not going to go through that detail. But let's say it's done. So we've organized that. It's done. We'll put it over there. You go in and close that out. But just try to make this very quick and simple. So let me go down into Teams. So I have this open. I'm going to go in. I'm actually going to create this new team. Now, when I'm creating a team, let's call it Contoso, because that's original. The Contoso team, it'll open that up. Go in there. Yeah, skip all that stuff. I go in and add users and stuff to it. I'm just going to keep this short and sweet. So I'm actually going to show you, two systems here. I've got guest access over into a PixelMill system. But now I go in there, I'm going to add a channel, and let's just call this project stuff, because I like to add a lot of detail behind the things that I do. Okay, we've got project stuff that's in there. So now, where I said, like creating a tab. So I can go in here and add different things. I can say, hey, there's an Excel sheet that I want to have part of this conversation. I'm going to add 10 people to this channel for project stuff. In this case, I'm actually going to go out to this website, and I'm going to call it, see, do I have another link to it open here? I do. I found this this is 2013. Eric Overfield and I did this video interview together for Digital Sack Lunch. We were at SharePoint Saturday in Bend, Oregon. But I'm just going to go in and grab that URL, go back to Teams. I'm going to paste it in there. And so let's say this video is essential to this project team, and I want to make it easy for everybody to find this content, add it out here. And I'm going to close that. We don't need that conversation. You can hear the music. Yeah. All right, so it's now there. So now, as I'm having a conversation with my team and adding people in, and right now it's just me that's on here, but if I say to my team, hey, we've got it over here, the relevant video is here, the project plan is here. So I'm going to go in. Let's do this. I'm going to add Trello. It's going to go in. I've already logged into this, so I'm going to go in. I've got my Teams demo. Open this in. It's created now a tab. So here it is in context to my Contoso Teams. In my project stuff channel, there's my Trello list. What's great about this is now as I go in, I can actually go in to project stuff, and I can, I can add the, there's the team, go in here, the conversations, I've got that added. Where is it? The, add in, it's fine in there. I've got something turned off, but let me show you in here because I know I've got it in here. Or I thought I did. I turned something, I changed something. All right, anyway, so for the connector, add in the connector. What's great about with the connector enabled is that as I go in and create like a new card here, I'm not gonna be able to show you this because I've turned something off, but I could go in and create a new card. I can type. Yes, I can type. Add that, and I can make an assignment and save. I can add that, add myself as it. I can add Michael there, and he would then get a notification. It would actually back in the conversations if I had the connector set up here. So actually go in and it would actually populate within here. But just from a time standpoint, I'm going to jump over, show you over in another environment. I'm actually over as a guest access into this PixelMill Teams environment. If you missed what I did there, yeah, I turned this on. So what's nice about this is that within Teams, if you've been invited into a few different things, it's all right there. I've got my guest access to a couple of different places. Really easy to kind of switch between those environments. But here, for example, we've got over in Project XYZ, we've got a number of different things that are in there. I can go, so as a guest, and this is actually the playing with Michael within this environment. Just say, like, I'm just gonna mention this, and Michael, there, come on, there he is, hello. So there, he'll get a notification there, he can respond back, we can have our threaded conversation there. As a guest within the environment, I'm not enabled to go in and add tabs or connectors or any of that kind of stuff. So that is, there's a notification, yeah, I saw it. I can see the full activity of all the conversations that are happening there. I can set up notifications here. So if I have that connector over into tabs, we've got the bot capability. If I'm flagged and I get those notifications, I can set up how I'm notified to my phone or to the mobile device. And Michael, why don't you go in? Do you want to do like a quick poll that's on this and show some of the bots that are available there?
I could probably do that, yeah.
And I'll just show you some of the other things on here. So I got, go in and mention multiple people. And in fact, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna mention a couple people. Who else do I have that's part of this? I'm gonna do everybody except Eric, because we're gonna talk about Eric. Can't believe that Eric was a no-show. I can spell, thank you. Yeah, there we go. So we can smack talk about Eric that's on there. But you think about this, now we don't have a bunch of project dummy data and things that are out there, but you start to get an idea that maybe the way that, guidance for setting up, yeah, he was a slacker. And I'm gonna do this. So if I go in, so the Growbot and just say, kudos to Michael for that. And then I am going to ping Eric so he's aware that we're mocking him. Slam. There we go. So that I'm using a bot to go in and kind of keep track of feedback of kudos for, in the system. And that's great as a manager to start to create in the culture where we're leveraging these different tools and bots. Should we TP Eric's desk? Yes, we definitely should do that. So we're going to track the poll there. I think we already have the numbers in our, yeah, I think somebody needs to go and do something to his desk for being a no-show to his own webinar here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, +1 there. but you have the ability now as a team where now we're kind of joking around trying to show you some of the capability here. But what's powerful about using Teams in this way is that it allows you to go in based on the culture of your organization. You can go in this project, add a tab into the relevant SharePoint team site, into that communication site, so that when we're talking about project XYZ, like, and the way that I use this, and I'll even show you this, well, I can't show you all my customers there, but I actually have a CollabTalk customer team site, a Teams, and then I use channels for each one of my customers. So when I'm talking with my employees about customer, like let's say PixelMill were a customer, they're not, but a partner. If I were going and talking with my employees about PixelMill, I would then have the tabs to, here's our conversation, here is a project plan for whatever we're working on with them, here is their website, here's their social profiles, and all of that right there. So as I'm talking with my team, we're not having to go jump around to find all of these assets, all of these resources, the SharePoint sites, all of those things. We can surface all of those things right through these tabs. Here's an example. So over in the general site, so we've connected this team site. It's just a generic team site that's out there. I don't think I have access to the com site. No, so we've linked it. I don't have permission to it. It's internal, but I requested it right there. So as you see, I get access to, based on my permissions, to each of these sites in context to this, get rid of that, in context to these projects or this customer. That's where you really start seeing the benefits of surfacing the SharePoint portal sites, which there might be 50 of the 100 employees that all they ever do is go in and use that intranet site, use SharePoint. But for those project teams to be able to go and surface the right content at the right time in context to these conversations in Teams, that's where SharePoint and Teams come together. And I'm going to jump back into, and I know I'm slightly over time here. Let me jump back into the presentation mode here.
One quick question before you get there,
Yeah.
a question that came in. Can you privately message anyone in the company in which you are added as a guest, or just the people in the team you are added to?
So that's a great question, because if you go into the chat and you can go and search and find anybody within that, you can go and create a new chat there. If I go in and do that net new chat, go in there and @mention, and so here it's you see, if I'm not in that collaboration, I've got to have access to those people to be able to add them in. I would assume it's based on where you have access, so they would have to be, and I don't know the answer if I see everybody in the company. My assumption is, because I'm a guest, I only have access to the people that are part of those teams that I'm a member of, that I would then only be able to go and chat because of that trimming with those people that I have access to in that. So I wouldn't then, let's say there's, I don't know how many employees PixelMill has, but let's say 100. And yet only 10 are members of the 2 teams that I'm a member of. I'm only going to be able to chat with those 10. I'm not going to see the entire database of employees. It's not the GAL. I can't see everybody. But I'll confirm that. But I mean, that's just the sense of the way that Microsoft has architected this and the permissions structures. That is the logical way to go in and do that.
I have a question on this, Christian. So in a chat, you would actually want to put the name on the top where it said start the chat name. I think you were typing in the.
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I figured you knew. I wanted to ask.
I know. I was my mind is split between 2 screens here. That's why I kind of stopped. But you're right. You just start searching on the name. It pulls that up. I mean, right there, I would see the 6 of us that are in there, because right now that's all that I'm connected to.
Got it.
But that's the point. I don't see all of the PixelMill employees. I only see the 6 that are part of the teams that I'm a member of.
Got it. Cool.
Yep. All right. So to get in, because I do want to move through this stuff very quickly. I know. And go ahead if you've got other questions, ask. I'll move through some of these very quickly, because I know we just have a few more minutes here. But there are a lot of questions out there around the security and compliance that's out there. Now at Ignite, there were a bunch of announcements made around the Office 365 security and compliance portal and the kind of the new capabilities that are out there. The things that are, all of these things are relevant to teams, because people say things like, when are we going to get, the auditing capability within Teams? No, it's already there. It's just through other workloads. So and this screen is always helpful to understand how Teams was architected. If everything that is that is files related, it's managed through the SharePoint workload. It is SharePoint on the back end. Therefore, auditing compliance security through that workload. All of the chats, the email, all of those things, the channel messaging is all through the Exchange workload. Therefore, all of the rules, the compliance, security, all of those things run through that workload. There is not anything outside of those workload channels today from a compliance protection standpoint. So that's just important to understand. However, having said that, people are asking when people are asking about, well, we want to have like archiving and audit and compliance, like those kinds of things. But people say archiving in Teams. What they're really talking about is the navigation experience. And the problem now is that there are limitations on the number of teams that you can create, the number of people within those teams, and the number of channels that you can go and create. But then as there's this proliferation of teams and channels, then that it can get really confusing and messing. If you've got 50 different channels within a team, and which are the ones that are live and that are active do you need to be paying attention to, and what needs to happen there? It's like, well, one way of doing that is to go in and unfavorite them. So today, like, that's a problem Microsoft needs to solve, is to say that you almost need to be able to pin the ones that you want and ignore the rest of them, and they're still discoverable, they're still out there, but from a navigation standpoint, the ones that I'm working with are these, and I'm therefore only going to pin these. And I use the favorites this way. And here's the difference. It's not just a matter of, hey, I want to go archive a channel or archive a team, because archiving means that you're basically taking that offline, and all of those conversations and the documents that are through those other workloads, it has an impact. So you want to be able to go in and you can always go and change the permissions, lock people out, make it view only, archive the content, move the content, the documents off, and then delete the Microsoft team that's related to that. But like in the way that I'm using and consuming Teams today, that doesn't make sense. For a project or a customer that maybe I've completed that, I've met the terms of the contract of the customer, and I then unfavorite them so they're no longer in the top level navigation. But let's say 6 months from now, I have a new project with that same customer. I go and move it back to favorites or re-enable it, and that as the admin for that, everyone can now go back and have conversations around that. But because I've unfavorited it, all that it did was move it out of the navigation and maybe freeze some of the activity on the conversation, so that there's not new conversation that's happening on what's essentially an offline or a completed project. But it's still, all of the assets, the conversations are still searchable. They're still available to the team. So that's just something that Microsoft needs to go and improve the story around, how that navigation cleanup happens. And then there's lots of opportunity for third parties to also go create solutions there. Some of the other security concerns around bots, it's kind of like my Amazon Echo, where my wife keeps unplugging it because she's just worried that like Amazon's just listening to us. The first thing is that we never have conversations that are interesting enough for Amazon to want to listen to, or for someone to hack into and get, like, we're talking about dinner, really exciting stuff. But it's also passive. All the bots are, when you call them up, they aren't just there listening. The other thing is that bots are an all or nothing solution now, meaning that you either turn all of them on or all of them off. Now, it is true that there is, all bots must go through the Microsoft, the bot framework, and they're vetted there. But this is something, again, I say, talking with a lot of customers that are thinking about GDPR and these other data standards, and where compliance guidelines that you must adhere to don't allow you to have automatic accessing of your system by outside systems, period. Doesn't matter if it's secure within the Microsoft cloud, you cannot have a bot that is going outside the system, is looking at information inside your firewall. Therefore, you may have to turn all bots off. Security for bots when they're on is at the end user level, meaning if the bots are turned on, users can go and add them. You need to have an understanding of what bots do and whether you have a concern there and that they are compliant with your standards, your industry, your regulations, because it's an all or nothing. All right, now with that, here's a screenshot that I saw this was from Microsoft Inspire in July over in one of the Microsoft booths. They had this up. I took a screenshot of this. There's two things on this screen. If you see my mouse moving around. So you have the first one that nobody really kind of caught and was talking about in July was the calling feature there inside of Teams, which might have caused a couple people to kind of scratch their head and be like, wait a second, calling features is what's happening with Teams and the whole telephony side of things, the PBX side of that, and with Skype and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, nobody caught that one. I was interested in this admin experience around bots and connectors and just apps inside of Teams. And this is where you have the ability, and this is again, I don't know time frame, I don't know who's yet has this in their tenants, if it's slowly being rolled out, if it's Microsoft internal only, but it's fair game because it was at a major conference and it wasn't in a secure, it was part of a demo. But the ability to go in and look at what are all the bots and connectors and things and apps that are being used, what are the featured ones? So you as an admin to go in and say, you know, hey, we've created this new connector to this internal tool, go and consume this. And even just to discover, or even better, is to have the system intelligently come back and see, I see by your usage within Teams, you're using this bot may be useful to you, and making suggestions. That's the direction that Microsoft is going, that kind of intelligence around an admin. Other things Microsoft is doing, of course, we've heard about it at Ignite, that they're working on expanded capabilities across all of Teams. Again, you get the capability through the other workloads, but Microsoft is trying to tighten up all of these components. Other things like auditing of Teams. Can I go in there and do it? Yes, it's very limited on what you can do around team creation, deletion, adding channels, and changing the settings. We need much more robust data around that, but you can go in and audit and see who is doing what around Teams. And then you can even go in and, because it's exchange-based, and audit and search around the chat to see, are people doing things, talking about things in these conversations that are of a security concern? Are they talking about something, some intellectual property in Teams where they shouldn't be? So you have the ability to go in and do this digging, and I think then go in where there's partner opportunities to go and automate some of this to maybe create a bot that you can go in there and add white label terms, like anybody talks about project XYZ anywhere, flag me. Let me know, notify me, so that me as a super admin can go in and let them see if they're having conversations about this top secret project in the right place with the right people, and maintain that.
Hey, just a heads up, we are in our final minutes, Christian. Yes. So I'm sure you actually saw that. I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump past through to some of these things too as well. I mean, some of the guidance around these things is Teams. I mean, you really need to think about how you're controlling provisioning. I know a lot of organizations are kind of controlling at the top level who can go and create. The more controls you put on a system, the more likely you're going to see this shadow IT effort of people doing things, going around IT. You want to be careful with the amount of controls that you put in place. You want people to be collaborative and give them the tools that they need. And so, so the guidance from Microsoft is not to lock it down, allow people to go and create teams. And it's great for them to say that, but you also need to have the ability to go and clean up groups and clean up the teams that are out there and consolidate and archive. There's needs that are out there that Microsoft still needs to answer how this stuff will happen. But in the interim, you can control the provisioning of that. Go and pilot, of course. You do need to enforce your naming conventions because there are not SharePoint Online managed paths. Doesn't exist. There are third-party solutions that are out there, but you need to be careful that as you're creating teams, that they're consistent with how you've already created SharePoint teams and Yammer groups and all those kinds of fun things. Because when you create a group, you're also provisioning a team, a Yammer group, a SharePoint team site, all those components. And so you need to be careful of how you're naming those things. And then the other thing is make sure that you've got regular scheduled training, recurring training. You cannot just assume that people intuitively know how to use all this stuff. They don't. Then all the backup stuff through the SharePoint Exchange workloads. As I mentioned, the whole favorites way in the short term of managing the sprawl there. And be aware of what the tools are done. Right now, and I've got this, I'll show you this. There's guidance Microsoft says about going out there and how you structure your teams and channels. And they've even given you some, I don't agree with everything on there, but there's guidance that Microsoft has that's out there. Go take a look at successwithteams.com. The analytics are getting stronger around this. It's still very high level around that auditing capability of the data that's provided around teams. Doesn't tell you a whole lot, but Microsoft is adding more and more capability there. There's great resources. This is actually from a couple years ago, a presentation from Ignite, but Microsoft has great resources out there. Here's the one you want, successwithteams.com. Right now is a placeholder. It's this top level with links to a lot of content. Bookmark this site. And there will be more and more case studies and examples of using Teams with SharePoint together. And so you definitely want to look back and follow along as they add additional resources and helps there. And of course, then there's guidance here. This actually came from Karen Wanagatimu of leveraging the framework. And this is from Microsoft internal IT, how they've been successful with deploying Teams. And Microsoft internally, heavy SharePoint usage. So they are putting together case studies and examples of how they work together. So you definitely want to leverage all those things. And I know I jumped through a lot of these things quickly at the end. Again, I'll have the slides that are out there. And any other questions, Michael, that I can answer before we wrap up?
Oh gosh, there are quite a few questions. I don't know that we'll be able to get to them quickly. What we can do is I can send these to you afterward, and we can. I usually do a follow-up log to these. If anybody who's been following our webinar, so I will send Christian the questions. He will answer those. Thank you, Christian, for all of that. That was a jam-packed episode of this edition of our webinar series. Where can we find you? Where can we see you next?
Right there. I mean, event-wise, I'm actually, I was home for an entire day and a half. I was gone for 3 weeks in South Africa and then DC, and I'm flying out tomorrow morning. I'm in Minnesota for SharePoint Saturday Twin Cities, then home for a week and a half, and then I'm at SharePoint Saturday Vienna before I head over to the European SharePoint Conference in Dublin, Ireland, and then I get to sleep after that. But otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Buckley Planet. Feel free to drop me a line. I'm not shy, so if you've got questions, I'm happy to respond as I'm able.
Great. Thank you everyone for hanging out. If you want to reach out to PixelMill, you can find me. You can reach out to me if you have any other questions, mwells@pixelmill.com. You can find us on Twitter at PixelMillTeam or at pixelmill.com. That's where you can find us. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for hanging out for a little bit longer with us. Thank you so much to Christian. Your session was awesome. We will have the recording of this up by Monday, and we'll have a follow-up blog with it as well with those answers. Hopefully in the 5 seconds that Christian has to himself, he can answer some of these questions for us, and we'll get those up for you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you around next time.
Thanks a lot.